If you have a faith crisis and you're actively participating in a religion, it's difficult to talk to people about it who are in their religion because it can feel threatening to them. It can feel overwhelming. And unfortunately, there aren't answers. A faith crisis is a faith crisis. Welcome to the Yes or No podcast, where we explore what it means to be rooted in our own authority. I'm your host, Jessica Savol. Thank you so much for being here today. On today's episode, we're going to talk about faith. It was really the beginning for me of the whole idea for this podcast, the Yes or No podcast. How do we know what we believe? Today's topic is faith, which is kind of a little bit, I think for me personally, a loaded word. And I've probably because it's most commonly associated with religion, which I do not participate in, but I was raised in a religious faith. And so there was a period of time in my life when that no longer fit. The faith of my childhood no longer fit. And so I let go. I let go of, I think, even the whole idea of faith. And I feel like that was the case for quite a while. I didn't really particularly like the term. I didn't really like the way that I felt associated with the term faith. For a while, I probably just felt a little bit lost. And it took me a while to reclaim it as a word that has a lot of meaning to me now, but that ultimately means what I want it to mean. And I think it's actually probably kind of the same meaning. It's just that I associate it with a different source now. And I think that it's perfectly valid to associate it with a religious source. I think a lot of people talk about a faith in God, which I think is very similar to the type of faith that I talk about. And we can just all agree that what it is that we imagine that we have, faith in, it's kind of not really the point. It's the having of the faith that matters so much. And to me, what faith means is a belief in things turning out almost kind of like the way that they're supposed to. And I think all that means is, it's not that I think that there is some necessarily grand design. I don't think that the future is predictable. I think that we all have choices and we can all take actions, and that can make an infinite number of possibilities of what will come next. But I think when it comes to my individual view of it, it's that I can kind of have two things. One of them is faith and one of them is doubt. And what I have found in my life is that if I can start things or do things or work on things from a place of faith rather than a place of doubt, I don't know why, but they tend to go better. I don't know if it's the energy that I'm bringing it with me. I don't know if it's the energy that I'm associating with those words that's making a difference. I don't know if it's that if I'm coming from a place of faith, I might be willing to look for more possibilities of ways in which it could work out, versus coming from a place of doubt, which is looking for all of the ways in which it can't work out. And I recognize that when I let go of religious belief, I did inadvertently, almost accidentally for a while, kind of let go of the idea of faith. In fact, I felt sort of a big resistance to it. And through a long period of, I think, just really reading and searching and spending time trying to reconnect with my most inner self, the little voice that I had ignored for kind of a long time because there was a better voice to listen to, is how I believed. I think that I got scared of the idea of faith. I got scared of that. It felt too attached to religion, too attached to dogma, which for me personally was not the right path in my life. and very aware that for some people that it is, and I have a huge respect for that. I think that belief is hard. I think that belief takes a lot of strength, and I admire and respect people's beliefs, their religious beliefs, and all of the other beliefs. But for me, I truly believe that what it was that I needed was not going to come from a religious belief or religious tradition. Ultimately, I needed a different guidance, and that guidance needed to come from inside of me. And it was a difficult transition and a difficult thought process to shift because it wasn't something that from a young age I understood. And what I have found is that the ideas that we are taught when we're really young can be very, very difficult to change. Even with a lot of concerted effort, something about being a child, something about being young, something about our neurobiology and our neural physicality, it gets very, very strong when we're children, and it's difficult to move it. It's difficult to shift it. It's difficult. And there must be some type of like evolutionary necessity about that. But it's kind of one of those things where there's a lot of information now that people talk about, like childhood trauma and how much that affects us as an adult. And it isn't necessarily a conversation that's designed to make parents and caregivers and other people who deal with children feel terrible that any little thing that goes wrong is going to ruin children. It's more just an awareness that children are extremely absorbent, and what they're absorbent is going to stay with them really for their whole lives. They may find ways to manage it. They may find ways to compartmentalize. Sometimes they disassociate when there's extremes, but it is always there in a way that I don't think ever happens again. It could just be the rate of the development, the rate of the neurons that are developing, and that things just get like really sealed in there. I don't know. But what it feels like to me is that beliefs that are strongly held in childhood are really difficult to challenge and change as we become adults. It's hard. It's really, really hard to do it. I have a belief about change that goes like this. The only thing that ever really changes someone's mind about anything is love. It's not fear. It's not reason. It's not being taught. It's not an understanding. It's not research. It's love. I've seen this play out enough times that I understand it. And when there's a lot of disagreement between people, I recognize a couple of things. First, most of us were taught or experienced a lot as children that it's very difficult for us to really change as an adult. And that's okay. Secondly, most people honestly really want the same thing. Most people really want like happiness, love, belonging, a sense of security for their family, a sense of security for their children. They want the world to be a better place. The difficulty is that we define those things differently. But I think that the intention isn't bad most of the time. I'm not suggesting that it can't sometimes be bad, because it can. There are things like greed and manipulation and narcissism and harm and all of that. But I think most of the time, everyone who I've ever talked to, which is a lot of people, most people really kind of are after the same things. They have very different ideas about how you get there, very different ideas about how you achieve what it is that you want. And that is okay, because that's kind of always been the challenge of humanity, is that there is a bit of a difference of opinion about how we achieve ultimately what are kind of similar goals, although we might have very different ideas of how we get there. So I think it's the same with faith. We use this word differently depending on how it was we were taught to use it and what it meant. Growing up for me, faith was a word that was associated with religious belief in God. And so at some point in my life, I became less comfortable with the word. And I really reclaimed it now because it's something that I feel extremely comfortable with. I think at some point I figured out what it needed to mean to me. And faith is hope. It's belief in not even necessarily, it's to me, faith and it is kind of a belief in something bigger than me as an individual. And it means that I can trust that for the most part, I can trust myself. Ultimately, that's what faith is to me. It's this idea that there is more going on than what's going on with just me, and that I'm a part of all of that, and that I get to choose how it is that I want to look at things. It's a choice for me. When I when I was just starting out trying to find a way to support a young family financially, I had to have a lot of faith in myself that I would be able to do it. That if there was a way to do it, that I was going to find it, that it would be achievable, that even though I didn't know how, even though I couldn't understand how it was going to work out, it sure didn't look like it was. I knew that if I kept trying, it was at least possible. Didn't mean it would be easy. It didn't mean that it wouldn't be wildly uncomfortable. It didn't mean that I would fail a lot. It just meant that there was going to be a way. I was watching this movie and it's Dune 2, the second Dune. And there was this moment in it that I really liked. And this is just a paraphrase because I don't remember it specifically, but it was this idea that there was this future that this one character could kind of see, sort of this vision of this future. And that most of the paths led to destruction and a lot of death. But there was one path. Maybe there was two, but what I remember is that there was one path, and it was narrow, but it could get to the same place, but there wouldn't be the death and the destruction. And I think to me, that's kind of my definition of faith, which is I do not think that there aren't horrible circumstances. I do not think that sometimes your best efforts lead not to the outcome that you wanted, because that happens all the time. It's definitely happened to me. But what I do believe is that if we're really in touch with our own selves, our permission, our authority, our intuition, our feelings, our bodily sensations, I think that we're in the best position to navigate a path that's not guaranteed to lead to death and destruction. And that might lead to abundance and to a sense of freedom. So I feel like for me, faith is a syncing up of myself and everything that I can feel with something bigger. That might be humanity. That might be the universe. That might be some energy. That might be God. It could be a lot of things. To me, the label is not important. The label is not important. What is important is what it is that the words and the intention behind the words and the phrases actually mean. And for me, faith is becoming more and more important in my life, and in a new way, and in a definition that's my own. And I think that everybody gets to do that. I think that everybody gets to figure out, for the most part, how they want to define these big words, especially if it was defined for you. And if it was defined for you in childhood, it may be harder. It may take longer. It might be more challenging to figure out what that is going to look like for you now. But I think it's possible, and I think that it's wonderful. And I really love the term now because it's something that I actually am using. I'm using a lot of faith. I'm using a lot of, I don't really know how it's going to turn out, but I believe that it will, and I'm less attached to what the outcome is. I know there's kind of an emphasis, especially in like the entrepreneurial world and in the business world, which I work in, around having a vision of how it will be, seeing it so that you know what it is that you're on track for, and that then you can mark off these metrics, right? I see myself with, let's say I'm a business owner and I want $50 million in revenue. And so I can see it. And the more I see it, the more I'm in a position to draw myself towards that. And so it's this like plan. This is a plan. This is what I want. This is what I want to achieve. What I find so interesting about that is, let's say that we've decided that that's what we want. We want some huge revenue. We want $50 million in revenue. And we are like, we're going to do it in 2 years. And then we have to put all of these things in place and see, are we on track? Most of the time a goal is something that you can backwards chunk until you can figure out how to start. And then are you on track or are you not? And it'll never go exactly how it is that you think that it's going to go, because you haven't done it yet. So you don't know. You don't know. And there's always variables, and there are always things that are not under your control. But let's say that you've done that and this is what you want. Well, what everyone is actually employing in that is faith. I mean, they've given their faith a lot of parameters, right? I believe that if I make this intended goal for myself, and if I do all of these things, I believe and I have faith that I can get to this place. It's still faith, right? And people are doing it all of the time. And that's not religious faith, but it is faith. It is faith that if you, for the most part, kind of try to do the things that seem like they generally are going to take you in the direction of some intended whatever, you're using faith. If you fly to Nepal and you pay someone $80,000 and you've decided that you want to climb Mount Everest, and you've practiced and you've trained and you've worked at it, you still have to have faith that everything aligns perfectly for you to be able to achieve that goal. It's still faith that you are going to be one of the people that can do the thing. A lot of other people have done it now, but that can do the thing where you put one foot in front of the other in Arctic conditions, up an incredibly difficult mountain to climb, get to the top so that you can put your flag there. You're signing up for huge amounts of support. You're hoping everything goes right. People die doing it all the time. They die doing it all the time. There isn't one of those people who signed up to do that thinking that they would die, though. They had faith that they would make it, or they wouldn't even have tried. If you believed that doing it would kill you, you wouldn't do it. You wouldn't do it. But they all had faith that they could, and so they tried. Not everybody was successful. But if the thing that matters the most is the journey, they all climbed Mount Everest. Getting to the top of Mount Everest is just like one moment in this entire journey. Climbing Mount Everest is climbing Mount Everest. If you got onto Mount Everest and you climbed it in any capacity, you climbed Mount Everest. Summiting Mount Everest might be slightly different, but the point is that you did it. I mean, you got closer than the majority of all people in the entire existence of humanity did, right? You were there, you climbed it. It's pretty remarkable if you think about it. For me, it's not important enough to risk my life to do it, but I do understand that for some people it is. So the idea of faith is that we all start out believing that something is possible. And I love that definition of faith. Some people think that faith means that you're basically giving away like your agency. Well, I'm not really in charge, but I have faith that something bigger than me is, and I have faith that it'll all work out exactly how it's supposed to. Well, that's faith. That could be faith in God. I believe God's in charge, and I believe God's going to make happen everything that needs to happen in order for me to, and then the answer to that is, in order for you to what? That means you have faith. You have faith in some type of mission or some type of purpose that, your partnership with God is going to allow for you. But I think that faith is helpful for anybody starting anything, but I think all the time, because it helps us to deal with the fact that there's so little that we actually can control. There's so little that we actually can control. I'm experiencing this recently with my mom, one of the healthiest people I've ever known, never been sick, extremely devout in her religious faith, which also has a lot of dietary restrictions that have kept her very healthy. No alcohol, no smoking, no coffee, no drugs, no all of these things. I mean, like really an incredibly healthy life. Provides service. She's in a community. She has religious faith. They have, like everything that you would hope for someone to be living a very healthy life. And she found out, and we all found out as a family, that she has cancer. And it feels like okay, you know, we are not really in charge. We're not really in control. We can do the very best we can to stack the deck in our favor, but there is this amount of randomness that seems to be there all of the time. There's so much like that too. Why is the person that smoked 2 packs a day for their entire life for 60 years still, alive and well at 94? Doesn't make sense. We don't really understand it. By the way, that isn't a reason for everyone else to take up smoking, because there's enough evidence to suggest that that person is kind of an outlier. But the point is that we can't really know what's going to happen ever. We just don't know. And I think that's why more and more and more I'm leaning on faith. I'm saying, okay, I will do all of the things that it seems like I can do, but I am aware of the fact that there's a lot outside of my control that I have to just be in a place of faith about. So I don't think that every bad thing that happens is supposed to happen. I don't think that it's all predetermined. I don't think that there is, I guess my version of God is not like a puppeteer. That's not the way that I can, view things. I believe that people have choices. I believe that that's the point of being here. Choices. We have choices, and what are you going to do with your choices? We do not have equal choices. We do not have equal circumstances. We are not all born the same at all in any way, shape, or form. Some people are born into an environment where they have extremely limited choices. And some people are born into an environment where they have nothing but vast opportunities and choices. We're not the same. We're not at all born the same when it comes to choices and when it comes to even opportunities. So then what's the point, right? I guess it's that it's not fair, first of all. And secondly, it's like everything. It's like resources. Some people do a lot with the resources that they're given, and some people do a lot with the choices that they're given. And some people have nothing but resources and they do absolutely nothing with it. And some people have nothing but choices and they do absolutely nothing with it. It's just kind of how it is. I'm not sure why, but it is. So I think that it's choices, and it's an understanding that you do everything that you can do, but you have to have some faith that A, it'll matter, and that B, you're going to make it, right? And C, you really hope you don't die along the way. None of us want to die along the way. So I'm really more and more comfortable with faith. And what I've realized is it's been a really good antidote for me to the idea that I'm not good enough. Faith is a good antidote to not being good enough, because it means that, well, I'm going to do what I can. I'm going to boldly go in a direction, and I cannot predict the outcome, and I don't know what will happen along the journey, and there are no guarantees, but I know for sure that if I don't start, or if I don't try, or that if I don't use my choices, then nothing will happen, So it's been a really exciting, I guess, a very healing thing for me to embrace this idea, because more and more and more I see that so much of what holds us back is that we're afraid of faith, a little bit afraid of faith, especially for anybody who has struggled in a religious community, who has struggled with a religious faith, who has left that behind. There's like a lot of existential crisis that kind of happens after that for a while. And it's kind of easy to reject anything that's sort of in that ideology. But for me, I guess I've come pretty full circle with it. And I see now that it was never just me functioning alone in a vacuum, and it never will be. There isn't anybody who is impacting nobody, right? Everybody is having an impact on someone or something, always. And so, it's just never us. And we don't know. We don't know who's going to be put in our path. We don't know who we're going to impact. We don't know what the consequences of our actions are going to be, because we only experience them for the most part pretty locally. I guess if you have a lot more exposure, I guess if you have a whole lot more platform, maybe you could have a better understanding of the consequences of your actions, at least when words are concerned, but still only to some degree. We really don't know. And you have to kind of have a lot of faith that it's worth trying even when there is an unknown outcome. It's worth trying even when there's an unknown outcome. I mean, every single person who becomes a parent at any time has to have a huge amount of faith that they're going to be able to do it, that they can be successful. I mean, everybody has a very different experience of parenting infants, but my experience was, wow, okay, I didn't realize like how much of the first couple of years of their lives is frankly completely devoted as a parent to keeping them alive, like legitimately keeping them alive, keeping them fed, keeping them safe, keeping them changed, keeping them out of harm's way. And I, I've loved being a mom to my children. And when they were infants, I just, gosh, it's so hard. It's so hard physically, it's so hard mentally, because I've never loved, I've never loved, I've never loved someone so much, and also felt so just ill-equipped, like, you know, I knew I could do it because I had faith. I don't know if I could do it as well as I wanted to, but I mean, think about the difficulty in keeping a human infant alive. It's hard. It's not easy, and it's not simple. It's hard. It's a lot to do, and think about the difficulty in it, and that yet we continue to do it again and again and again and again. It's faith. If you have a faith crisis and you're actively participating in a religion, it's difficult to talk to people about it who are in their religion, because it can feel threatening to them. It can feel overwhelming. And unfortunately, there aren't answers. A faith crisis is a faith crisis. The thing about it is that faith is a scary word, I think, for a lot of people. I think it can be. I think it was for me. I think when you lose your faith, which a lot of people do, sometimes it's referred to as like a faith crisis. I had a faith crisis at one point in my life, and it was terrifying, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody. And I know that I have a lot of family members that don't understand what that was all about. And I never talked about it a whole lot because A, it was very personal, and B, I didn't want to hurt anyone. And it's very difficult when you have a different belief system than the family, than who you were raised by. I have incredibly loving, wonderful parents. We're very, very close, and I adore them. And it's hard to have a difference with them when it comes to belief and when it comes to faith. And so I wasn't able to talk to some of the people who were the closest to me at the time. If at some point the beliefs that are inherent to the religion or inherent to the faith no longer work, some people find a way to kind of bend it to their own will. Some people find a way to kind of like live in more of a gray area. Some people find a way to kind of be more of like a social participant in their faith, or a cultural participant in their faith. For me, that wasn't an option. It just wasn't an option. I wasn't capable of continuing to participate in a religion that I did not believe to be true. And I couldn't teach my children that, and I couldn't be in a gray area. I just knew that it wasn't possible for me. And it was necessary for me to separate, but it was so painful and so hard because I knew ultimately, well, I hoped, I actually had to have faith to leave my faith, but I had to believe that I could trust myself, even though at the time it was one of the first times where I really did that, basically in the face of just like a lot of opposition. Not even that anyone was like actively opposing me. I just was aware that in my family, and in my, broader family, in a broader way, I wasn't going to find anyone that was going to agree with me about it. And so it's difficult to say, no, I'm not comfortable with my choice, but this is the right one. This is the right one for me. It was an exercise in a lot of faith that I would be okay, that it wouldn't completely destroy relationships that I had, and that I would find a new way to be. I could find a new community. I could find a new way of looking at the world. I could find a new path. I could just find something. At the time, it felt like I was in a snow globe, and it was dumped upside and shaken around. And I was so disoriented. I was so sad. And I realized how much of what it was that I thought, like who I thought I was, but I had to kind of dismantle who I thought I was from what I had taught I was, what I had been taught I was. And so it took a long time. I mean, it's been for me now, like 19 years. So I've still been a member. I was still been a member of the faith longer than I've now not been a member of the faith, although we're getting kind of close here. But I realized that for me in the beginning, it kind of felt like when it came to faith that when people didn't necessarily understand or agree with my choices, I know they never wanted me to fail or experience pain or heartache. Nobody, they didn't want that. But it could occasionally feel like they thought that they understood why. Well, if you had stayed faithful to this belief system, you wouldn't be experiencing these things now. Nobody can predict whether that's true or not, but I did experience that messaging in a way that was quite painful. So it made it harder for me to want to really talk to anybody, and I just stayed really quiet for a long time. I did what was right for me. I did what I felt like was right for my family, but I wasn't public about it. I really didn't talk about it. I avoided it as much as possible and just kind of went along with my life, just went on with my life for the most part, as much as I could. I worked to stay close to people, even though we no longer shared the commonality of their religion. And it was hard. It was hard to continue to show up, even though I knew that I wasn't understood. That wasn't an easy thing to do, but it was important to me because my relationships with people were more important than why we were in the relationship, and I wasn't able to maintain relationship with every single person. I guess at some point you find out, well, I guess maybe that was the only thing that bonded us was our shared religious belief. Fortunately, I have plenty of relationships with people that's not the only thing that bonded us. In fact, our bond is way bigger than that. It was a piece of it, but we were able to overcome it. And I hope that for everybody, but I know it is not easy. It is not easy. So for me, faith is something that, was taught to me and that I understood in a very specific way, and then had to kind of figure out how to make my own. And maybe part of growing up is deciding how we're going to do that. We have to do that a lot in our life. Okay, how do I make this my own? How do I make this unique to me? How do I add my uniqueness to it? What is my uniqueness? How do I find it? And talking about it is hard. I have a huge worry about hurting people, because if one of the most closely held things that somebody holds up as why they exist is, if you're not in agreement and you used to be, it's painful. It's painful for everybody. And I acknowledge that. And I have a huge amount of, I don't know when it comes to it, right? I don't know how. You just keep trying. I think just be willing to sometimes be uncomfortable. It doesn't mean that you need to in any way not honor your own beliefs. But I think for me, what has been the most healing is finding out at some point that I really didn't change much at all. I really didn't change that much at all, actually. I remember people, when I first left, I had very, very young children, and people would say, how are you going to possibly raise your children without this? That was a common thing that people would say. And I think at the time it was like, I didn't have the words for it. It was like, I'm just going to have faith that I'll figure it out and that it will be possible. And that there are plenty of people, in my opinion, who have been raised in different religion and different faith with different belief systems and different systems, sometimes with an anti-us system, and they turn into great people. They turn into wonderful people. For me, it was important to meet a lot more people outside of that initial faith group, because I learned that people are really similar, just generally. Most of the time, obviously there are exceptions, most of the time people care about their families, they care about their children, they care about their friends, they care about the well-being of the people that they love. They care. Most people care. We get into disagreements and dust-ups, especially if you don't know people, or you misunderstand them, but most people care. And more and more and more, what I've seen over time is that what I have faith in now, more than anything else, is that when presented with a difficult situation that's impacting someone who you deeply love, often people change their minds, you know? And it can be around any type of topic that's easy to misunderstand. But if you get past all of the ways in which we sort people, if you can get past that, what you can see, and you can start to try to feel better what it is that people are putting out. What I've found is that the outside kind of shell of a person, the things we have no control over, so much of like how we look or where we were born or what language we speak or, what faith tradition we were taught to follow or what the rules were of where we grew up. If you can get past that, people are really at our core, like quite similar, you know? We want to be happy. We want to feel loved. We want to belong. And a lot of people want to contribute. They want to know how to contribute, you know? But we all want to take care of people around us. At the very least, we want to be okay. We want to be okay. And I'm in the extremely privileged position by having been female and born in the US. And I know that. I have no idea what other people's experiences are that do not have that same. And even in the US, now with resources, like some resources, I own property. I I think about how there's very little now that I'm not allowed to do, that I'm barred from doing. Unfortunately, in the US, it has felt like some of that's been threatened recently. But, I didn't grow up feeling like the things I had no control of were destined to completely shape me. Well, in some ways, they kind of were. But in others, I think that, you have to reinvent. You have to kind of reinvent what it means. I remember when I first started to work a lot to take care of everyone. And I was, like working single parent and my kids were younger and trying to keep it all together. And I felt guilty at times because it was harder to do a lot of the I guess mom tasks, stay-at-home mom tasks that I had been able to do when the kids were younger, when I worked less and I had, another adult in the home. They got more complicated and more difficult to do. And so I remember thinking to myself, gosh, I'm just not a very good mom anymore. And then I had to kind of stop myself and I had to think about that. I'm like, well, what does that mean? Well, it's harder to keep up with laundry. I've had to turn more tasks over to the kids. I'm asking them to be more responsible. We are ordering food more often. I don't cook everything from scratch. Most of the time I cooked everything from scratch just because it's cheaper, by the way. It wasn't because I necessarily thought there was a huge amount of virtue in it. It was just less expensive. But I had more energy to do those things when I wasn't also the sole provider for my family. And I did recognize that I could be a good mom even if the main thing I was providing for my family was our income. It made me a good mom. It was very necessary. It was very necessary for me to do that so that we could, have food in the fridge and a roof over our heads and everyone can have shoes. So I had to kind of look at what it was that I had associated or identified as my role and then figure out how to adjust that. And I had to have faith, again, that my kids were going to be okay, even if I could no longer mom in some of the ways that they were used to. It wasn't always an easy transition for them either. Mom, you never make dinner anymore. And it was like, sure, you've never ever gone hungry. And I know you're annoyed by, we're having frozen pizza. But I have to look back now and realize that not yet, right? Not yet. But one day, if my kids are ever in the position that I was in, and I hope that they are not, but if they ever are, or they know someone who is, they will have a very different perspective of what it was that we all experienced. It's never fun for anyone, though, if you have less people trying to do all of the things, less things will get done, and things may not get done as well. It's just kind of how it is. And I'm sure it was frustrating for the kids that there was a downgrade in, the way that like food was managed and dealt with. I've definitely let them fend for themselves significantly more. But there was this moment, my two older children moved to New Zealand for a while, and I realized that, as much as it's wonderful to do a lot of things for other people, there's also value in them learning how to do things for themselves. So I had to kind of redo my idea that I could be a good mom and still not do a lot of the things that I used to do that I thought made me a good mom. I think being a good mom mostly means I love and care for my children and I'm doing the best that I can most of the time. Because I can't do the best that I can every single second of every single day because I can't. But I had to, at the time, have faith. I had to have faith that they would be okay. I had to have faith that they wouldn't suffer. I had to have faith that it was possible. And it was a different kind of faith, for me, it's a different kind of faith, but it feels very similar to the faith of my childhood for me now, because for me, it is less of a concern about the outcome, the eventual outcome, and more of a emphasis on the journey, right? I can't predict ultimately what will happen, but this is the direction I'm going to go in, and this is what feels right to me, and this is what I'm going to continue to do, and I don't really know what all the time and the markers will be, and we can't really predict it anyway, but I'll do my best. And I really believe that good will come of it. What that good looks like, I don't know. I really don't know. I don't have a whole lot of expectations for things anymore because I have found that the doing it for me now is getting to be more, a little bit at a time, more of the emphasis. I used to just want to be done, I just wanted everything to be done. I just wanted to get to the end. I just wanted to have accomplished it. I thought that is where the good stuff was. If I can graduate from college, then I'll be a college graduate, and being a college graduate, that's going to matter. And no, what mattered was the time that I spent getting to the place where I achieved the goal. Once I had that degree, I don't want to say that higher education is unimportant because I think that it is important, but it was certainly less relevant than I had anticipated. People are happy when you have an education if it does something for them. So if my education helps me make you more money, if my education helps me create more efficiency, then the education matters, And obviously it's different depending on what the education is. But every time we start on anything that we haven't done before, we do it with a lot of faith. And I think it's good for me now to understand that is what I've been doing all the time. I just didn't really have the right words because that was a scary word that I associated with a part of my life that I didn't, necessarily identify with anymore. So for a long time, that word was off the table. Now it's back. It's been back for a while, and I'm glad that it's back because it feels very comfortable to me now. I got to dismantle what it was that I thought that it meant. And everybody can do that. Everybody can do that if they want to, if they're willing to live with the consequences. We can really do anything. If you can live with the consequences, certainly. But I will say, my email is connected here for this YouTube video. So, if there are other people who have been through like a major faith crisis and, they want to talk about it, I'm sure willing to talk about it, can share that. I don't have tons of people that I've met and that I know that have also gone through that, although I know that there's a lot. So, okay, that's me signing off for today, having a lot of faith that there's a reason that I did this and felt uncomfortable, but did it anyway, and that something will come of it. What that is, I don't know. I hope you've enjoyed the Yes or No podcast. If you've got any questions or feedback for the show, you can reach out to me by email at jessicasebol@gmail.com. I look forward to hearing from you.